Hi, I'm Lee Terry from The Middle Ground. The Middle Ground, or TMG, is the online people's think tank that promotes moderate, productive, and nonpartisan solutions to economic, social, and political problems.
And I'm Cynthia Smith from The Middle Ground. You can learn more about TMG, the People's Think Tank, at our website, themiddleground.org. But don't go there looking for some political partisanship, some cheering for the red or blue team. That's the wrong place for that stuff. TMG is just trying to get something done without involving all those bickering politicians.
This is the third installment of our series on climate change. In this series, we are examining a number of potentially effective and practical responses to climate change, a problem that's gotten much too big to ignore. If you disagree with that premise, then this entire series is not for you.
But if you are frustrated by the thumb twiddling of our politicians and government on this issue, you are definitely in the right place. We encourage viewers to participate in the search for solutions to climate change by visiting TMG's website, the home of our online People's Think Tank.
You know, I like that, thumb twiddling.
Yeah, that means they aren't doing anything.
Or at least anything that will get the job done before there is a full-scale global disaster.
Yes, I know you think climate change is the real-life version of that Leonardo DiCaprio movie about the asteroid, Don't Look Up. The idiotic politicians there only cared about getting reelected, not saving the planet from a planet-killing asteroid.
Meryl Streep was really great in that movie as the unscrupulous president.
But this isn't a movie satire. It's real life, and we do really need to save the planet from planet-killing greenhouse gases.
Okay, let's get into it. In our last episode, we talked about how worldwide regenerative farming could stop and reverse climate change all by itself.
But we also admitted that getting anything done by everyone in the world isn't realistic. But if we got half the world, or a third of the world, converted to regenerative farming, and we also did a lot of other positive climate protecting things, we actually could get the job done and stop climate change.
So this time we are going to talk about another carbon sink. That is something that actually eliminates greenhouse gases we create with livestock and fossil fuels.
Yes, this time it's reforestation. It sounds pretty simple and non-controversial. Even Donald Trump said it makes sense to him, and he is no climate change alarmist.
Yes, it was actually the Trump administration that coined the "trillion trees by 2030" slogan. Unfortunately, reforestation has some drawbacks.
I have heard that it's expensive, hard to plan, and really slow.
Correct. Important, but slow and expensive.
Of course, there are two sides to the reforestation coin stopping deforestation and reforestation. Every year, the world destroys 25 million acres of forest land in an area the size of Portugal.
I know you like Portugal.
But while 35,000 square miles sounds like a lot, it's really only around 0.2% of the 15.7 million square miles of forest on the planet.
Yes, deforestation is actually slowing a bit, but it's still happening, with 95% of it in the tropics, mainly the Amazon rainforest.
Agricultural expansion is the main driver, I'm sure.
Yeah, here we are again. The poor farmers are the climate change bad guys once again. Large-scale commercial agriculture is almost half of the reason it's done, and then local subsistence agriculture around a third.
The big commercial guys might be stopped by honest governments, but how can we ever stop the deforestation being done by small farmers trying to feed their own families?
I'm not sure we can. But any deforested land should be a good place to insist on regenerative farming, which would reduce the net loss carbon and actually help the subsistence farmers produce more food.
But deforestation also destroys habitats for other plants and animals.
Not to mention fungi.
I'm glad you got that word right this time. Anyway, reforestation is one area where individuals can make a difference without having to rely on government action.
I assume we're talking about more than planting trees in your backyard.
That's always a good idea, but no, I'm talking about private reforestation charities. There's this one, Reforestation, that has already planted 14.8 million trees, and they are headquartered in France.
Ah, France. It's always about finding you a nice European vacation spot, isn't it?
Good wine is very important.
You're right, of course, and not just about the wine. Reforestation.com has projects going in Europe, North and South America, Africa, Indonesia, and Australia.
But you're going to say that they're just a drop in the bucket that can't even keep up with deforestation, right?
Well, yes, but they're not alone. OneTreePlanted.org is another nonprofit headquartered in Vermont that's planting trees around the world. Tree Nation is another, and there are many others. There's even a website listing dozens of different reforestation organizations called reforestationworld.org. I see lots of TV commercials about companies planting trees. Are they legit?
Subaru has planted 500,000 trees in areas struck by wildfires.
The Aspiration Zero credit card is the newest thing. It's a MasterCard that will plant one tree per purchase and give you the option to round up your purchase with a contribution to plant a second tree. Aspiration says that 60 trees planted per month would offset the average American's carbon footprint.
I kind of like the tree card MasterCard, but partially because the card is made of real wood.
Yeah, it's a nice gimmick.
They say 80% of tree card profits will go to reforestation and climate investments.
That's just tree card's profits, of course, which are only a small fraction of what MasterCard will make on the card.
Correct. There are lots of other non-credit card companies planting trees, like WeWood, which plants a tree for every wooden watch they sell, and also Trinity Oaks, wine, and Pacific Shaving Company give money to plant trees with purchases.
So lots of ways out there to assuage liberal guilt, aren't there?
Come on, these are good things. So the Trillion Trees by 2030 campaign slogan is a realistic goal?
No. We actually need to plant 100 billion trees a year to do that, and we're not even close. And besides, trees and forests are slow.
The Replant Act was included in the big infrastructure bill passed in November 2021, correct? Isn't that a lot more money?
Well, yeah. The Replant Act removed the funding cap of $30 million per year for the Reforestation Trust Fund, which is the government fund that pays for replanting trees in American national forests and parks.
Did you say 30 million? Not billions? Millions. Seriously?
Yeah. It's truly pathetic.
Okay, so how much is it now?
Well, it's really jumped. It's around 120 million now. The bill added no new spending. It only reallocated funds already being collected through existing tariffs on foreign wood products to plant 1.2 billion trees over 10 years.
That seems like a paltry effort, especially since that bill spent so many billions of dollars.
Well, it's only part of the reforestation story of the infrastructure bill. The Replant Act is only going to plant 1.2 billion trees in 10 years, and the stated goal to plant 1,000 times that many, 1 trillion trees.
Okay, so we are definitely not there yet, but we all agree that reforestation is a good pragmatic idea that can make a real difference in the fight against climate change. So before we talk about the rest of the infrastructure bill, can we talk about the 4 ways to get climate change solutions implemented other than a ton of government spending?
Okay, remember, we have prohibitions, mandates, regulations, and incentives. So what do you think?
I think there's room for all 4 here.
Okay, shoot.
Prohibiting the destruction of any forest. Norway has already done it. The whole world should do it. We are trying to do it in the US, but wildfires here are winning the battle. Millions of acres of US forest land have burned because of, you guessed it, the climate change that's already here. But did you know that half the deforestation in the world nowadays is already illegal?
Yeah, that statistic comes from the World Economic Forum. an exclusive nonprofit business organization formed in Davos, Switzerland in 1971. They operate on the stakeholder theory, meaning businesses are accountable to all of society, not just their shareholders.
Now I remember. The WEF, as they're called, is also criticized as an elitist gathering of the super rich. I heard that billionaires take sellers of their all-access badges to the WEF conference in Davos to share on social media.
Yeah, they show off with selfies just like the rest of us, only much more expensively.
Still, they're not just a bunch of aging hippie tree huggers. If the WEF billionaires care about deforestation and climate change, we should all be worried.
Agreed. As you said, WEF contends half of the world's deforestation could be stopped just by enforcing existing laws.
They also say that world markets are currently flooded with illegally harvested timber and wood products.
So, do you think that a prohibition on the importation of illegal timber and wood products into the U.S. would be effective?
Well, we already have one, but it's not really working. The 2008 Lacey Act amendments banned imports of illegally sourced wood and other plants, but the law doesn't require proof of legal origin, and the foreign laws that are supposed to be enforcing are seldom clear-cut. So it's become a game of liar's poker.
Okay, how would you fix that?
The U.S. could annually certify entire countries as to whether they are net reforesters as opposed to net deforesters, and then only allow imports of wood and wood byproducts from reforesting countries. That would be in addition to disallowing illegally harvested wood and its byproducts from any country, even if the country itself is a net reforester.
Do you think that'll work?
I think so, but only if Europe, China, and other countries were part of the deal.
Well, that's going to be a tough sell. So what else have you got?
The timber industry. Instead of just planting one seedling, a baby tree, for every tree they cut down, the rule should be that they have to plant 10 seedlings for every one cut down. And they are responsible to make sure that all 10 are alive for 5 years, or they have to replace them.
Yeah, the Sierra Club says the problem with most reforestation is that replanting 10 trees doesn't work if 9 of them are dead in 5 years, which apparently happens a lot. Still, 10 trees for every one cut down, pretty extreme.
Let's go to regulation. And to do that, we can revisit our billionaire friends at the World Economic Forum.
The capitalists are in favor of regulation? Really?
WEF favors demand-side regulation on businesses and consumers regarding wood products to be produced only with legal wood.
That sounds like the Lacey Act. We already decided that wasn't working very well, and expanding it to require reforestation would be hard to sell to other developed countries.
Hang on, I'm getting there. We haven't talked about our favorite method, creating incentives. Remember how we talked about using tariffs and taxes to cause vegetables made from regenerative farms to become the cheapest produce in the supermarket?
Yeah, I remember. So you want to impose taxes and import tariffs on products that cannot prove they were made from legal or sustainable forests.
Not exactly. As I said, I don't think we should be focused on compliance with foreign laws. That's the mistake of the Lacey Act. But if the USA and other developed countries could impose punitive tariffs and taxes on wood and wood byproducts from net deforester countries, then sustainable wood will become cheaper.
So, once everyone stops focusing on how a particular log was harvested, and instead on the exporting country's net forestation practices, the market for illegal timber might slow down.
Timber exporting countries will improve their deforestation laws or their enforcement of existing laws so they can export without punitive tariffs. Net result, less deforestation.
I assume you would use the money collected on the tariffs for reforestation?
Remember, the Replant Act already does that. I just want to collect more in tariffs, a lot more, and make more unsustainable wood uneconomic. And yes, the U.S. government will have a lot more than $120 million to spend on reforestation under the Replant Act.
It sounds like it's a reasonable plan, but considering the dollars involved, wouldn't it be just easier to get an aspiration credit card and support nonprofits like OneTreePlanted.org and Reforestation.com?
You know, we need to do multiple things at once, since not everyone will do everything right.
Did you know that One Tree Planted planted 23.6 million trees all over the world for less than the $30 million they raised in 2021?
What's disgraceful is that $30 million is the same amount the U.S. government spent on reforestation in 2021.
Yes, it is. That's disgraceful.
Still, the Replant Act and all these nonprofits combined don't come close to 1 trillion trees. We just need a lot more money, private and governmental, to make a difference.
Is there a lot more money in the new infrastructure law for reforestation besides the Replant Act?
Yes, but as Larry David says, you need to curb your enthusiasm. There's $200 million over 10 years to reforest abandoned mine land and another $200 million over 10 years for building up a national stock of seeds and seedlings.
That sounds great, and I know the infrastructure law also provides $2.57 billion for post-fire recovery and burned area rehabilitation and $5.16 billion for hazardous fuels reduction and vegetation management.
Another $100 million is allocated to local communities to restore forest landscapes. $1.5 billion is slated for state and private forest restoration and another $200 million for tribal forest restoration.
That is a lot of money, much more than ever before.
You don't seem that enthused. What's the catch?
Well, the $2.57 billion is just cleaning up the mess of past and future wildfires, which were caused by the climate change mess we've already got. We do have to replant the millions of acres that burned the last few years, but it's not changing the equation. The $5.16 billion is the one that really burns me.
That was a bad pun.
Yeah, okay. But tearing out millions of acres of CO2-eating vegetation to prevent forest fires from spreading across forests is not reforestation. In fact, it is totally counterproductive and might even negate all the other positive expenditures. Remember, new forests actually gobble up a lot more carbon than old forests because of all the greenery.
Okay, but do they have a choice?
Well, probably not, because we really do want to prevent more forest fires, which emit millions of tons of GHGs every year. But this huge amount of money does not help the long-term fight to reforest the world in order to reduce CO2 and other GHGs. It's just treading water, putting a very expensive Band-Aid on the climate change wounds we already have, and at least in the short run, making the problem worse by creating more bare land.
That seems cynical, but I'm afraid you're right. We know that bare land is a bad thing that can exacerbate climate change. What about other big dollars in the infrastructure bill?
Well, the money allocated to state, private, and tribal landscape restoration efforts could be more productive, but if history is any guide, most of that will be wasted on things that don't result in net reforestation. Pretty landscaping is not necessarily going to have less bare dirt and less concrete, frankly.
That's even more cynical.
I would love to be proven wrong, but I have serious doubts about whether these big ticket items will actually result in net reforestation. I'd rather put those billions of dollars into plain old tree planting like the Replant Act. Spending most of the money to strip the land of vegetation to protect the houses of people who recklessly built them in the forest does not appeal to me.
Okay, so let's sum it up. The new infrastructure law is a mixed bag. Some of it is definitely positive, but it may not even result in net reforestation in the U.S., and it doesn't do anything for the bulk of deforestation, which is occurring overseas. And we should all financially support the efforts of reforesting businesses and reforestation charities, which are more efficient and more international.
And support new laws that discourage overseas deforestation, like tariffs or taxes on countries that are net deforesters, much better than the Lacey Act, which is pretty ineffective.
Right. So, what do we talk about next time? Are we finally going to get around to ideas for reducing emissions of greenhouse gases?
Not exactly. We're going to talk about some emerging technologies that reduce, and in some cases actually consume, the excess CO2 that is already in the air.
Ooh, technology. Much better than boring governmental spending numbers. I'm looking forward to it.
We are all the middle
middle ground.
ground.